All right,
Yeah, I'm sure
cool.
people will be real excited to hear about team stuff in general.
Yeah, I think it'll be a lot of fun. I know I told you this, but I'm still waiting to talk to Clifton until one, he like wins something again, and two, like his list is stable because his
Yeah.
old list just like doesn't like he's had to rework it pretty heavily for Pariah Nexus, whereas you're kind of just doing fairly similar things for the most part.
That is the opposite of what I'm going to say.
Really interesting. I'm excited to hear it. But anyway, welcome back to another episode of Tactical Debrief, everyone. I am Joshua Joshi Howard, and I am joined here today by David Purcell, who recently went 99-1 at his team's event. What team's event was that again, David?
That was the North American Team Championships eight mans. They ran a five and an eight at the same time.
Yeah,
We
I
played in
saw
the
that. I saw
eights.
your buddy Chris also did quite well.
Yeah.
Yeah, very cool. So anyway, I've already told you this, David, but I'm gonna have this one be a bit more free flowing because David and I talk fairly often already on Discord, whereas most of the other people that I'm gonna be having on this series, I will be talking to for the first time. And so, just in case something weird happens, just making it a little bit more structured. But David, I know I've said this to a couple people. I've said it on Reddit, and I'm not sure how you feel about it, but I've generally described you as probably the best Leman Russ specialist in North America, and I'm curious what you think about that.
Yeah, I definitely won't say no to that. I've played them a lot, but I don't generally try to think of myself as a specialist. It's more just I play what I think is good.
Hmm.
And ever since Russ has got dropped in points, they're just the best thing you can be doing.
Yeah, that's fair. Because I know we were talking a little bit about you trying to get like your ITC ranking like number one
Yeah.
in the country, and you were like in close competition. I was close for a little while, but then like Marshall Peterson, who was playing a drastically different list with as many horses, well, dinosaurs as you could fit in a single list. Like I think he ended up being like 3 points higher than you as the other North American player, but I'm trying to think
Yeah.
because most of the North American players, we're seeing some like super heavies being played by Robert Moreland. Nick Jagello of Canada plays things in chimeras all the time, and so I think that's one of the things that's been really cool to watch is just like all of these really strong players are coming at it from very different angles.
Yeah, it's definitely been a ton of fun seeing that like I can kind of just throw anything from a list of like 20 good units into a guard list, and as long as it equals about 2,000 points, you're pretty much golden.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm actually really curious. When did you start becoming of the opinion that Lehman Russes are the way to play?
Um, so around when they got their points drops, so start of 10th edition, every guard player played their 105 point manticores because you just can't not play a manticore when it costs 100
Yeah,
points.
I was luckily missing this entire meta, so I didn't have to deal with all the Eldar and the Knights craziness.
Yeah, that was just a completely nonsense time period, but it was very fun to put like eight different artillery pieces on the board and not look at your opponent until turn five when they're tabled.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, right around the first time they got their points drop, I started sliding them in. So that was around like October, November-ish.
Hmm.
Um,
Oh wait, were they even more
and
expensive before that?
yeah,
Oh
yeah.
wow, because
A tank commander used to be like 220, 240. It was
oh
insane.
jeez, yeah, I
Yeah, like
remember I wasn't even considering putting them in list until like April, I think, is when they got their next set
oh
of
wow.
point drops, and I was just like, yeah, why would I play this when I could just run Dorns and horses? Yeah.
Yeah, so you roll like all the way back to end of last year at Warzone Atlanta. That was my first like big success with Russ's. Where I finished second overall at a like 100 plus person 3 day event.
Nice.
And that one was the first big experiment with what happens if I just put three tank commanders in a list and say I win every gun duel. Because you can't really outtrade a tank commander in shooting, right? Like
Yeah.
there's a couple games on stream where you see my Tau opponents just struggling with this entire mindset of like, wait, I want to shoot the tank, but anything I shoot the tank with, the tank shoots back, and the tank already shot me, so it's already gotten value, and I have to give it more value if I want to kill it,
Yeah.
or I have to go melee it to death, which just does not work at all.
Not if you're Tau.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
So that list was like three tank commanders and two of the plasma Russes.
Oh, interesting.
Um, and then yeah, just kept iterating on it. And basically, those iterations consisted of how many demolisher cannons can I put in a list before it stops working? And the answer is six, and that's just because that's as many as I can take.
Totally fair. I definitely have seen like Chaos Space Marine players doing similar thing with their I think they're called Vindicators or whatever. It's like
Yeah.
how many Demolisher cannons can we put in? And I know that you've gone through a couple of different iterations of just,
Hmm.
six or more Lehman Russ holes over the past like year or so. And
Yeah.
I think you're the person who, yeah, anybody who's like read my stuff on Reddit or has like even watched like the Leman Russ video knows that I've become kind of an acolyte of the idea that Leman Russes, they're not intended to be melee tanks, but they are surprisingly good melee tanks.
Yeah. It's if you're not charging with your Leman Russes, you're playing the game wrong. I still get World Eaters players who look at me funny when I declare a charge into 8 bound until I say tank shock and they realize like, oh, I just lost an 8 bound and a half and I'm going to deal 3 damage back to you.
Yeah,
The math has changed a little bit though recently. So I used to like getting them into combat because then they spend a full turn cycle in combat and they get lethals the next go around. And that doesn't happen anymore since they changed the lethal rules. But yeah, I'll still charge Leman Russes and Hellhounds all day. And I'm not super scared of them getting touched back.
yeah. In general, what are kind of the requirements that you're looking at to say this is a good charge versus this is a charge I don't want to take?
Yeah, so the most obvious one is, do I get killed on the swingback? Don't charge a Russ into Angron. That's just a silly thing that you should never do. Unless he's at like 1 damage left and you can tank shock him down. The Honestly, that's really the only requirement. Um, I'm generally more thinking where's the best place to put the tank shock. I'm not thinking this is the only place I'm charging. You'll see some games where I charge 3, 4 different Russes in the same turn. Especially great for throwing Tau players off because their mindset is this is a gun duel game. And then you tag 3 different units and they're just like, wait, what? This isn't what's supposed to happen.
And then they fall back and
Uh,
shoot with three of them anyway, and they're like, oh, it's okay, but like, what just happened? Yeah,
oh, they fall back, but that means they're not advancing. They're not
true.
doing all their other crazy stuff. So you can use it for a lot of controlling of space, a lot of move blocking. Um, yeah, really anytime you can declare a rust charge, I honestly think you should. It's actually a game I won almost entirely off of Russ melee against Green Tide Orcs. 'Cause he
Wow.
just wasn't letting me shoot him enough. So it's like, you know what? If all of my Russes make all of their attacks every turn, that's a lot of dead orcs. So like I did shoot a lot of guns at him, but I also probably meleeed 30 to 40 orcs down in that game.
That's a lot of like melee kills from a Leman Russ. I guess one of the other things then is you've been talking about trying to make sure that when you go for these charges, you still want to
Mm,
try and do it in such a spot where your guns still have line of sight on things. So could you elaborate a bit more on that?
yeah, for sure. So you don't want to charge them like into a ruin behind a wall where you're not going to get to see anything if you stay locked in combat for 2 turns. But if you can throw them out in the open, blocking up an important sight line, then your opponent still has to give them all the respect that they previously gave it. Of, this Russ will still shoot anything that looks at it, and it might not do super well if it's hitting on fives, but it might, right? They have to respect it. Nothing is as scary as a Vanquisher cannon pointed at an orc truck. Um, and generally, that's where your opponent wants to be, right? Is on those big open lanes they have to move through. So if you can just park a Rust there, not a lot can really just get through a Rust trivially. Even a lot of melee threats like Orc Boys or even a lot of knobs will just kind of bounce off for a
Yeah.
turn or two.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So, are there any matchups in particular that you find this strategy doesn't tend to work, or is it really just kind of list based?
Um, the biggest scary one is Chaos Knights with a lot of carnivores, because those will just pick up a Rust and there's 6 of them. And they are you can probably kill one carnivore with one Rust and shooting, but the 5-up invuln means that it's always kind of swingy. And if 1 or 2 of those go wrong and you lose 2 Russes in a turn, then you're in a really, really bad spot.
Yeah.
Um, Other than that, Blood Angels can be scary. Like, don't charge their Lamarty's brick, but you can still play pretty aggressive on them. And a lot of times they're not expecting you to take angles into them that, they're thinking like, oh, he's never going to come within 12 inches. And like, I'm already in 12 inches. Let's go. Um,
That's where I get my
who else
meltas to
is?
pop off.
Yeah, right. Got to shoot your melta-guns. If you're not shooting your melta-guns, are you even trying?
I was having some discourse with people online as well about like plasma cannons versus
Mm,
multi meltas on Russes, and I know you are very much very firmly in the multi meltas or nothing.
yes, the biggest part is you can't fire a plasma cannon in combat. It's a blast gun, so it just doesn't work if you're in melee. So that makes it pretty ineffective. The other thing is like if they are if the range matters, right? Like 18 versus I think 36,
Hmm.
then there's such an open sight line that you should just have enough other shooting to put down that angle. You got your main guns on all your Russes that are long enough range to get down that. And then if it's that far away, are you really even scared of it? Right? Like if it's beyond 18 inches, you don't have to worry about it until next turn. You can just use your multi-melt to solve the problem right in front of you, and then you drive another 10 inches next turn, and then you shoot it with the multi-meltas
Yeah.
again.
Yeah, I hadn't really thought about the we can deal with that later. That's a problem for future David to deal with.
Yeah, exactly. That's a turn 3 David problem. The turn 2 David problem needs to be solved, and that's where the melta guns come in.
Yeah. I can tell we've got a very similar like sense of dumb humor going on here, so this is gonna be fun. Yeah. So, I guess something that I'll try and set it up off on the side while we talk, but maybe I'm gonna try and put together like a Rust tier list, and we can put that
Mhm.
on screen for people, and it
Sure.
won't just be our talking heads. But I'm actually really curious because you were talking about the North American Team Championship where
Mhm.
you recently went 99-1. Right, for people who are not familiar with the team's format, the scoring is a little bit different. You still play a normal game of 40K, but at the end of the game, you adjust the scores. So it doesn't matter how much raw score you have, you only care about the differential. And for basically for every 5 more points that you won by, you get 1 point and your opponent loses 1 point. So if you win by uh 51-15, it's a 10-10 draw. Like nobody gets any special bonuses for their team. However, if you win 56-50, you suddenly have an 11-9, and that's actually a win for your squad. And then every 5 points beyond that, you get an extra point. And so the fact that David, you won 99-1 means you had four
Mhm.
games where you had a differential of at least 50 points, and
Yep.
one game where you had a differential of like 45 points.
It was actually a differential of exactly 50, and I'm
Oh, exactly
still,
50. The
yeah.
1 point
So
off of the perfect
you got it by
100-0 event.
exactly 1 point. Good job, Cell.
Oh, well, there you go. So I'm actually really curious. So, do you have the list handy that you took to that event?
I have it pretty well memorized. I also have the battle scribe of it pulled up if we want to go over
Yeah.
that.
Oh my God, you just flashbanged yourself. Sorry, audience.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Battle scribe is very light. Yeah, so I've got it.
Perfect. All right. Could you go ahead and just run through that for us and talk about let's I know you had a plan for it, but let's just talk about the list as it
Sure.
is first.
So yeah, so the biggest thing to notice is not the first thing in the list, it's the first thing not in the list, which
Mhm.
is Lord Solar is not here, which is something that I've been playing with entirely consistently, but cut him for this one.
Mhm.
So going down, we've got Ursula Creed. We've got two different Scion command squads. They're identical in every way, so plasma, hotshot volley, hotshot volley gun, and a melta gun. The only difference is one is the warlord, one is not. That makes all the Scions battle line, which matters for secret missions and matters for some random things like raise banners. Um, and we've got a single tank commander with Grand Strategist. That's the thing that gives him the two orders. Demolisher Cannon, Multi-Melta, Las Cannon, Hunter Killer. You'll hear that a lot because that's how every single tank is equipped, because that's the right way to equip a Leman Russ
Yep.
of any variety. Then if you go on down, there should be 20 Kriegers. This is really important for denying Call the Horde. If they draw it and you have the 20-man Krieg alive, they don't get to discard it for free. Then you got a, I guess, 9-man infantry squad. So a mortar, 8 little guardsmen. Very importantly, they've got a Voxcaster attached, so they get to try and regenerate CP every time Creed uses a strat for free on them. So that's kind of your like stand-in Lord Solar CP farm. Then you got 2 units of 10 Scions with double Plasma, double Melta. Remember that they are battle line, so that's super useful for, I said, all those scoring abilities. Then a single 5-man Scions, so just 5 little idiots, drop them somewhere, score 5 points, don't think about them again. Um, then we've got 5 horses, just 5, couldn't afford the 10. I kind of wish I could have. They're probably the biggest thing. Like if I could get the 60 extra points, it would be 10 more horse or
Mhm.
5 more horses, but couldn't get there. They'll still hurt stuff when they charge it though.
Yeah.
Then we've got a pair of Hellhounds with heavy bolters for their secondary gun and the flamer for the main gun. Heavy bolters really important, so you can reach out 36 inches and touch something. And then we've
Just hit
got
your
the
hunter
core of the
killer,
list.
man.
Yeah. I wish I was that good. That's how I lost that 1 point that
Oh
time.
no, not Shaquille.
Then we got the real core of the list, which is 3 Leman Russ battle tanks. So they're the tanks, get the full rerolls, have an okay main gun, and then multi-multi lasgun and hunter killer heavy stubber, and then 2 Exterminator Russes. So those are the ones that give you the extra AP bonus.
Yeah,
I think that's everything. Did I
yeah.
miss anything?
That sounds like everything. Now, my first question, David,
Mhm.
is: would you run this list in a singles event?
I'm going to find that out on an RTT this weekend.
So a very solid maybe.
This list was definitely designed with teams in mind. So not just how do I score, a 79 to their 78, but how do I hurt somebody? How do I make them score nothing, not get any points? I deny them everything. I take everything for myself,
Yeah,
which is very different from how you have to play in singles.
and I
So things like the 20-man Kriegers, I'm not sure if they're actually correct in singles, but in teams, I think they're absolutely correct because that 5 point denial is one more differential that can get you a game even more locked up.
yeah, that makes sense. And I know that for basically uh, other people who are looking at teams, it's also important to know that at every teams event, you will have a certain number of terrain maps going in, and they're
Hmm.
going to range. Depending on what you play on, they can be very heavy, super dense. They can be super light. Most of the time, they're
Yeah.
somewhere in between. And WTC, which is probably the most popular teams format, they're dense or like yeah, I think they're heavy and light, have the same number of ruins on them, but like they might not be on the objectives, so you might actually be like shooting at objectives in the open. But David, I know that your event had all the Pariah Nexus recommended terrain, and you had a specific terrain set that you really liked playing. So what one was it, and
Yeah.
why did you build for that one?
Yeah. So in 4 out of the 5 rounds, I played on layout 5. I should have done it in all 5, but I messed up the terrain picks a little bit. So, um, and yeah, the reason we like layout 5 is it is a layout that only works on Dawn of War, and we never played Dawn of War. We were always playing Tipping Point or Crucible Battle or other ones where you start on the short side. And this layout has all the terrain horizontal. And so when you start here, and your opponent starts here, and all the terrain is horizontal, they can't hide anything from you.
Yeah,
On the flip side, you can't hide anything from them. So a big part of the list philosophy was I'm going to put as many durable 2-ups in cover as I can, just like sticking little toes in cover so I get that effective 1-up save. And just kind of look at my opponent and be like, if I go first, you're dead. If you go first, I lose a Russ or two, and then you're dead.
that's really funny. I know that that I was looking at a similar event where it's like, oh my god,
Mhm.
there's just no cover anywhere, and we came up
Right.
with the most devious, ridiculous list that would have been completely not in the spirit of any
Yeah.
actual like tournament. But it is really interesting to hear. So could you talk a little bit more about how some of these games went? I saw that you played up against a
Mhm.
couple of Knights players, but I don't remember seeing all of your opponents.
Sure, for sure. So the first one was against a Knights player. Oh, actually, both the Knights games are honestly pretty similar. Both of them, I killed Canis Rex turn 1, killed all the Armigers turn 2, killed the rest of them turn 3. And that's kind of how Knights games go when you're guard. Um, you just line up all your long range shooting at them and fire everything at the biggest knight that you can see until it stops. And then you take your extra shooting and put it into some armigers. Or if they have a second large knight, you can put a little bit of extra shooting into it. And then, yeah, when you kill a big knight a turn, knights just kind of stop working.
Yeah. I'm actually really curious. Were your opponents playing like 2-6 or like 3-3 or like what kind of were they?
Sure. So one of them was 2/6. So it was Canis, a teleporting crusader, and 6 armigers. The other one was Canis, a lancer, a castellan, and a handful of small ones.
Gotcha. Interesting. And did you? I mean, it sounds like you just picked one. Did the Lancer give you any trouble?
The lancer actually whiffed really hard. So it charged in, tagged a Hellhound and a Leman Russ, uh, dedicated 3 to the Russ, 2 to the Hellhound.
Oh.
Hellhound died instantly. Russ made all of its armor saves.
Oh no. Yeah, I mean, sometimes that happens when you're just swinging. I am a little surprised that he actually like devoted hits into the Hellhound, but because like the
I
flamer
was
doesn't do
too.
a lot. Yeah,
Yeah, and I'm ignoring cover, but like I'm firing so much AP bonus into something that you're on your 5-up invulns no matter what.
yeah,
And he was using the 4-up invuln strat consistently.
yeah.
Um, so that was a little bit of a weird choice on his part, but also he has every right to claim that the math should have said both die. So I
Fair.
can't
Yeah,
blame him too much when he's kind of looking for like, how do I get this game back on track? And the answer is kill both. And he probably should have killed both.
fair. Yeah, because the Lancer does like, is it like 12 flat or it's
I think
some
it's
stupid
8
number?
flat.
Eight
So yeah,
flat.
any two
Yeah,
going through kills a Russ.
yeah. And it's also like
Yeah, so those
AP 3 or 4, so like you're on a 5 or 6
yeah.
up save. So I can understand it at the very least, especially like if you're trying to dig yourself out of a hole. But what about the other games that you were playing?
Yeah. So the round two matchup was against a Greater Demon list. So I believe it was the 4-up Invuln, 4-up Feel No Pain, Great Unclean One, a Keeper of Secrets, a Lord of Change, and Bellicor, and then some other random demony Griblies. Um, this one got me a little scared turn one because he walked his Great Unclean One into the middle, and I fired, I'm not exaggerating, my entire army at it. Like all 6 Russes, every Hellhound, everything except for the Scions who are off the board, left it on 1 wound.
Oh no.
So I had to declare the 6-inch charge into a tank shock, knowing how risky it was. But fortunately, the tank shock got through, took out the Great Unclean One. And then he Bellicor dropped in my backfield. I made my Scions go fight his Keeper of Secrets for a few turns while the Russes cleaned up everything else. Basically, just denied them from scoring any real primary by killing anything that's out on a primary objective all game.
Yeah,
And it turns out lethal hits are really good against demons, and the fact that my main guns didn't have much AP didn't actually matter that much because they were just rolling 4-up invulns all game.
yeah. That's fascinating. I know like these are 3 matchups where you're playing up against a lot of vehicles and monsters where the
Mhm.
Leman Russes really shine because
Oh
they,
yeah.
yeah, I mean they're not just vehicles and monsters, they're vehicles and monsters that don't have great
Mhm.
normal saves, and you're always going to be putting them on the invulns. So like you said, like the AP doesn't matter as much. Did you play up against anything that wasn't monsters with invulns?
So I played against Tau in the fourth round, which was 3 Riptide, 3 Hammerhead, and then a bunch of Breachers. So
Oh,
that's
interesting. Yeah.
kind of. I mean, they didn't have invulns; they were just rocking their armor saves. Um, and that game was very interesting. So it was looking to be a like tactical, like maneuvering, trading, taking angles. And then turn two, I drew Bring It Down. And Bring It Down doesn't cap anymore. So it's like,
Yep.
well, okay, the game has told me what to do. And I drove every Russ its max speed forward, dropped every Scion, and just killed every vehicle I could see.
Yeah. How many bring it down
And
points did you get?
I think it was 10 or 12 in that turn.
That's a lot, especially
Yeah,
nowadays.
it's
That's a
like,
lot.
yeah, it's like, I think 2 Devilfishes, 2 Hammerheads, and a Riptide went down, and like a Piranha or two. But basically, just broke their entire army in one turn because instead of playing the safe game, also one important thing to keep in mind for teams is how the rest of your team is doing. So we had my wife as our coach actually going around and being like, "Oh, table four just suffered a few points. We need to make it up somewhere." And we were looking down, so it's like, okay, well, we're either going to lose this round by a little bit if I don't do something insane, or we might go back into draw or win if I just 20-0 this game right now. So that kind of tells you like when is it okay to just gamble everything. So between that, drawing Bring It Down, gambled everything, and the gamble paid off. So no lessons learned, always straightforward, shoot everything.
Hey man, sometimes you just get lucky with that kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Were any of these 4 games the one where you only won by 50?
It was the demons game that
Gotcha.
I only got a little bit because they just had some demonettes like scurrying around, scoring enough points.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one of the things that I think is really interesting for anybody who's never played a teams event. Again, like there's so much more incentive to play games
Mhm.
out in teams
Oh
than
yeah,
in singles. Because if you know it's like, oh, I can't win this game, like in singles, like, well, okay, well, we're kind of done. But in teams, that 1 point, I don't know if it made a difference, but that 1 point could have been the difference between your team winning, losing, or drawing over the course of a long game. So you fight for every single point that you can. And I think it's interesting, like you said, right? You just kind of went for this big gamble because you needed to make up some points, and then it sounds like it just went really well, and so suddenly the rest of your team
yeah.
knows that, oh, okay, we don't have to take as many risks this game.
We actually lost that round, and everyone
Ah,
else
well,
was still
they
in
suck.
risk-taking mode. But it told everybody else, like, basically, we looked at the 5 remaining games, like, okay, if 2 of these gambles go really, really well and the others go neutral, we're in a good spot.
Yeah.
And I think it ended up working, like, 2 went really, really well, but 2 went really, really
Ah,
badly. So we
unlucky.
still ended up behind on the round.
Fair, yeah.
But it's the kind of thing you have to do, because if you do nothing, you just kind of slowly stumble into a loss. And at least we got to go gloriously into our defeat.
Yeah, that's fair. Now you had one more game. What was the last game?
Yes, the last game was against a really interesting Bringer of Flames Sisters list.
Okay.
It was 3 by 9 Paragons and 30 Seraphim was the core of the yeah, right?
Okay, I did not know that anybody was bringing more than like one unit of Paragons because what was it, the Morven Vol or whatever?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, so they
like,
had Morven, and then they just kind of had random sister stuff in addition to all
all
that.
right.
And it was an interesting list. Unfortunately, it was not a list designed for layout 5, because he had Meltaguns at 18 inches and 12-inch flamers.
Yeah.
Um, and there's not a lot of room to hide. Like, he was basically having to pick with each Paragon unit, not do I hide it, but which of the shooting lanes do I hide it from? And I just put 2 Russes on each shooting lane. It was like, it doesn't really matter to me.
Yeah.
Um, so that game did not go super well. He also underestimated how fast a guard army can be. As I very realistically could have screened out the whole board by turn 3 if I dropped my last unit of Scion somewhere
Yeah.
risky.
I think a
So
lot of non-guard players underestimate how fast
yeah.
guard really is. I know. So, funnily enough, at my team's event,
Mhm.
my captain and I played at the RTT like a week later or something, and we were
Yeah.
playing a guard mirror because I pushed him off of his guard, so he had to play death guard for us. But at the um, after the top of turn 2, my
Mhm.
opponent literally had nowhere on the board to bring in strategic reserves. Right? It's like,
Yeah.
no, you just can't do anything. I just full court pressed. I got everything, and Scions just completely block out so much of the board.
Yeah.
But a lot of players, especially first time running into guard, it's really hard to kind of understand that. And I'm actually really curious because I know that you were saying that you took a lot of your opponents kind of by surprise because guard players have a
Mhm.
reputation as not being very good.
Right. Your words, not mine.
I'll say it right now. I will stand by it. I see like our Meta Monday numbers where we have like 40% winners. I'm like, guys, like this might be the strongest we've been all 10th edition. How are we dropping these numbers?
Yeah.
But
Yeah, definitely got a lot of surprise, and it's even more valuable in pairings, because it's not just, you rock up to the table and some random number generator picked your opponent. It's I put myself out as the first defender every single round, kind of just saying, like, pick your 2 champions to come fight me, and I will put them on the worst table imaginable and we'll do it. And every single round, I think with one exception, I don't think they realized just the kind of game that I was going to put us into. My Tau opponent did realize. He just didn't realize quite how quickly I was going to put us into the stupid game. But in every other round, they kind of thought, like, oh, well, this is a guard player. So the demons thought, like, well, if we just put Bellicor in the back and do the 18-inch bubble, then that 18 inches gives us enough room. And I was like, no, it doesn't. Full speed ahead. And both Knights players, I think, underestimated the damage that guard could put out and the damage guard could take coming back.
yeah,
As I used to a Knight Crusader picking up a lot of Space Marines, doing a lot of damage, but it really doesn't do anything to a Leman Russ. Especially because I just kept saving up CP so that I could smoke and -1 damage it with
yeah,
3 CP. And like, what does a Crusader with its AP 2 damage gun do to a smoked -1 damage Leman Russ?
yeah. Absolutely nothing. And it's kind of
Yeah,
crazy to just especially because in this edition bracketing is fake. Right.
yeah,
Like, like you don't. Oh, I lived on one wound. Cool. I literally don't care. I'm now going to charge this in, and the -1s don't stack. So it makes a
yeah.
lot of sense. But let's talk a little bit more about the pairings because you were the
Mhm.
captain for your team,
Yep.
and your team got fourth out of I think it was like 19 teams,
Yeah.
20ish. Yeah. So, that's pretty good, but I know a major part of doing well in teams is even if you have really good players, you got to put them into the right matchup. So, could you talk to me a little bit about the pairings process and particularly how you are trying to decide your opponents when their 2 champions came forward?
Sure. So to start off, we had the full pairings matrix that basically had all 8 of our players, all 8 of their players, and then the 64 possibilities. And then we were cycling through some really cool tools my wife made in Excel. She's also a software engineer, so
Nice. Yeah.
um, yeah. And going through and basically looking at like when they put forward two lists, I'm not just looking at what do I have the best matchup into, I'm also looking at can I remove a list that the rest of my team really struggles into. So for example, with the Tau list that I pulled in round 4, we had a lot of red against them. So like our Sisters player didn't want it, our Blood Angels player didn't want it, our Tau player didn't want the Tau mirror, and they were two very similar lists. Who's like, this is a 10, this is a coin flip, we don't know what's going to happen. So I just looked at that, I was like, okay, I'll take that. Um, and that kind of reduces the number of bad matchups you have to worry about in later rounds. I will openly admit on the internet forever, before round 5, when I was in a position to win best overall, I did ask my team, can I just pair myself well and forget the rest of you guys and just try for best overall? They did say yes, so I don't feel bad about it. But for everyone who thinks I did that, absolutely in round 5, no question.
I love it. You just got to throw the rest of the team under the bus. But let's talk a little
Oh
bit
yeah,
more about the matrix actually, because
sure.
one of the major things is building a good teams matrix is one, you have to have players who understand a lot of matchups. So what actually went into you guys building, your green, yellow, red, or whatever system that it was that you were using?
Yeah, so we actually had two different systems running. My team had two people that we stole from Pro Tabletop, Colin Watts and Walter Langendorf. So they had the Pro Tabletop, which is like one of the big professional teams, like they were at DreamHack and whatever. And then we had our version of it. And actually, you can watch in round 1, we were on stream, and you can see Marie on one side of me and Colin on the other side, both with spreadsheets, both with a bunch of colors and numbers running. Um, so the main thing we start from is overall matchup. So we'll break down every faction into a couple archetypes. So like Marines with tanks, Marines with melee, Marines kind of generic, Marines that are sneaky. So you get the like 30, 40, 50, however many different ones. You break down all of your lists that you might play. So when we were like going through the process, we didn't know if, for example, John was going to play Drakari, Eldar, Genestealer Cult, and you rank all of those. And these are really, really rough. You're just putting like 10, 8, 5, 15, just something really rough to give us the general idea. And then you use that to pick your actual 8-man roster. And you're looking for things like pairs or triples of attackers who all have some really, really good matchups. So something like these 3 lists, if you put them into knights, it's a guaranteed 20-0 regardless of board, regardless of any other situation. And you look for lists that can mitigate your bad matchups. So you might see like, oh, 5 of us struggle with Blood Angels. We really need to pick our last 2 lists, 3 lists to be able to handle Blood Angels. So it's kind of those two competing forces that go into it. As far as getting the numbers accurate, they're never going to be accurate. You should not try to get them perfect. You'll just be wrong. And even if you get the number perfectly accurate, like to the stat check matrix, it's going to be wrong because your list is different, your opponent's list is different, and your opponent's skill level is different. Um, I don't super value ELO as like the ultimate end all be all, but like we had everything from people at the bottom of the ELO, like bottom 100, to Brad Chester at this event, who's I think like top 5 ELOs. So you also have to account for, a list played by someone who's won 20% of their games can be very different from a list played by someone who's won 80%.
Yeah.
You take all that into account, and then you iterate over it. So once you got the actual pairing in front of you, you then go from 13 lists you're looking at and 50 matchups to the specific 64 that matter. And you really drill down on like, okay, we're playing Linchpin. Linchpin means end of game scoring is a really big deal because you can max out Linchpin at like 23 on the last turn. So who's really good at preserving their units as opposed to someone who like, World Eaters, if they don't front load the points, they're not going to have a lot. So you might lower the Blood Angels, increase the Drakari as an example for that specific round. Even if normally they'd both be 10s, the Drakari might become a 12, the World Eaters might become an 8. So you do that iteration. And then we also had our coach going around getting consistent updates, maybe once every 30 minutes to an hour because we don't just want to know your prediction at the start. We want to know, by round 3, hey, George, how's your Tau game looking? Has it gone to the 14 you expected? Has it gone over? Has it gone under? And then adjust how we tell people to play. So we were talking about earlier of like,
Yeah.
oh no, something went really wrong with Colin's game that we knew was going to be a coin flip. All right, we need 3 people to take 3 risks to make up those 10 points that we should have
Yeah.
had.
Is your wife also a 40K player?
She is a 40k painter who
Fair, yeah.
also will play sometimes.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, she has some of the best painted orcs you'll ever see, and she's played maybe 10 games with them.
Yeah, that's not bad. Yeah. I'm
Yeah.
actually really curious then because she was the one, it sounds like, who was going around and like getting the updates from the players.
Mhm.
Like, what constitutes a good update from one of your players? Not like in terms of the game, but like,
Mhm.
good information to give.
Yeah, so the most important thing is the score. So telling us like it's trending towards a 12, it's trending towards a 7, whatever the number is. And then the other key bit of information we looked for is what I call upside or downside. So it's saying I've got a 12 with upside, means like I'm currently locked in at a 12. If you need me to push, I can start trying to pull that 15 or that 18. Or you could be looking at a number with downside. So like it's a 10 with downside. I can lock the 10, but my opponent might start pushing me in the other direction. And that really tells us, where to push and where to conserve points. So if we're looking for like we need to make up 4 points, you don't really need to talk to the downside games because they've already told me like, hey, not only is this going badly, but like it's going badly with room to get worse. Versus the upside games, you can tell them like, hey, you're playing the melee sisters build we have. Like, now's the time. Go crazy. Find out what happens.
Mm.
And to be honest, like she's sitting right here, so she might get mad at me. But the fact that she doesn't know a whole lot about the games itself, like the on the board, actually really helped a lot with those updates. Because when the players would start talking about a bunch of like really minutia board state things that don't matter, just went right past like, no, 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 that
Don't
doesn't
care.
matter. I
Yeah.
need the number, I need the upside downside.
Yeah.
And then it also is actually really important because you're not allowed to give at the table advice. You can't look at your Tau player and say like, I think you should do this, this, and this. The only thing you can tell them is the current score and the score you need from them. So having somebody who understands the general concepts, but like is not a super competitive, intensely involved player was really nice because no one could accuse us of doing anything not allowed.
Yeah. That's really interesting. I don't know about this, but I know at my team's event, like I would kind of fall into a coach role because my games would be over super fast
Mm-hmm.
because I just had this stat check list and only
Right.
one player could even like pass the stat check. Um, and so, but what I would end up doing is I'd go around and like try and find an update, and then in general I would ask players like, hey, can you push? Or like, hey,
Right.
can you hold? Right? And this is one of the big things, and it's like, okay, I need you to play a bit riskier. But one of the things that
Right.
I think is really interesting, kind of looking at all of this, is there are definitely like lists that can push, and then there are lists that's
Mm-hmm.
like it doesn't matter what my matchup is. Like I'm going to get you a 10, and that
Yeah.
is it. Like, so I'm kind of curious, like how you build. Do you guys build draw lists, or do you tend to build very sharp lists?
Yeah, some of our lists are definitely built to realistically never win a single game all weekend. Um, there were matchups they could win, but for example, like John, thank you so much for falling on 5 grenades for us. His Drakari list was not really designed to win a game. It was designed to just have like 30 units worth of fast-moving garbage, score like 70, 80 points, and then take eights all weekend.
Yeah.
Um, because as long as he's doing that, if we put him into a matchup that's rough for everybody else, he's doing his job perfectly. Um, we also learned a few lists that we thought could push later, could not. The biggest example is the Penitent Host, where they're kind of like Gladius, where they have the 3 different modes of like they move faster, they fight better, they fight on death. But unlike all the other ones, it's not optional. They must do one each turn for the first 3 turns,
Oh.
which then meant when I went to Drew in one round and said, "Hey, Drew, can you push with this sisters list in round 4?" He said, "No, I don't have an army rule anymore."
I hadn't heard about that, but yeah, that makes sense. We just kind of run out of things. True.
Yeah,
I can definitely see like kind of like with world eaters, like
yeah,
I
exactly.
did all my pushing on turns 1 and 2, like 2 and 3, and like my army is either won or lost at this point. Like I can tell you what happened, but that's really interesting. So I know that you end up getting yourselves a lot of these vehicle and monster kind of lists.
Mhm.
What were the other lists that you chose not to play into, or at least the armies, if
So
you
the one that,
remember them?
yeah, so the one that stands out the most, as I really didn't want to do it, was an AdMech list that was just 9 of the Ballistari chickens. And I was basically looking at it as like, this is just the picture perfect definition of a coin flip. Because he will go first and he will laser chicken me, and maybe it works out really well for him and I lose 4 Russes. Or maybe I go first, I kill every single chicken, the game ends immediately. Um, but the other option they gave me was that sisters list. So I could look at that and say, like, I can almost definitely just like take this out by playing a more cautious game with range rather than relying on a coin flip. Um, there weren't a whole lot of lists that scared me that much though, because of the layout 5. Just taking things that normally make guard a little bit scared, like the Blood Angels or the Bringers of Flame Sisters, and just making them completely ineffectual by never letting them hide from me. And I think my opponents were largely aware of that. Like they kind of knew they couldn't put their 10 brick Death Company Lamarties into me when he would not get to hide for the first turn of the game. So there wasn't too much scary stuff specifically because we were playing on layout 5. I would have very different opinions if we were playing on a more normalized terrain set around what to avoid, what to go into.
Yeah. I guess kind of in general, guard has oftentimes fulfilled a really flexible role in teams. So,
Mhm.
and it sounded like you were playing like first defender, just like really abuse some of the terrain. But
Yeah.
on another terrain set, or on a different team, what other kinds of lists were you thinking about bringing to this event before you locked this one in?
Yeah. So there's 2 other archetypes that seemed interesting. One, shout out to Andrew Whitaker, who brought 50 horses. So he had, I think, Max Attilan Rough Riders and a bunch of Death Squadrons. And he's the only player I've ever seen attach Lord Solar to a unit of Attilan Rough Riders and win games off of it. So
Hey, Marshall Peterson,
that,
my goat.
oh, okay.
But
Didn't
yeah,
know he did that too.
yeah,
So that list was pretty insane. And it was backed up by 4 Demolisher Russes. So that was a really interesting, like, kind of just turn the board state into a pile of nonsense. It's like horses are running everywhere, scoring points, Demolisher Russes are killing stuff. Um, so that one stood out. And then another option we looked at and rejected was the kind of like older David Gaylard style artillery and Bulgren heavy builds. Thinking like if I could just pair into Blood Angels with that build, what they're probably thinking is hide Death Company in terrain, jump out of terrain 12 inches. And if I'm blunting those charges with Death Company and then shooting them no matter where they are, that would also be pretty effective. That was stuff we were thinking about pre-Pariah Nexus, and then Pariah Nexus dropped, and it was like, well, okay, let's not do that. That's maybe not the way forward.
yeah. Fair enough. So it sounds like you kind of had like a pretty strong idea, and you're just like, well, this is just going to be too difficult for people to deal with.
That was the general idea.
Yeah,
Once we like parsed all of Pariah Nexus and saw what mattered and saw layout 5, to be honest,
yeah.
it just seemed like the right call, and nothing else we had could play layout 5. So getting that board out of the way was also a pretty important part
Oh,
of what we were trying
interesting.
to do.
So you said 4 of your games on layout 5? What was the?
Everything but the Tau game was on layout
Gotcha.
5. The Tau game was on layout 4, which is also very, very open. We just picked the second most open board and went with it.
Fair. Is it because like your opponent like won the roll off or something?
No, it's actually way worse than that, and I am still really mad at myself for it. So they had the cards printed out with like table number and the picture,
Hmm.
and the pictures didn't line up with the table numbers.
Oh no.
So our opponents won the roll off and first picked the board that had the picture of layout 5 on it, but it was actually table number 6. So then I was like, oh, okay, I guess they took layout 5 from me. I'll go grab a different one. Grabbed 4, and then in the next round they flipped over layout 5. And we were just like, wait, but you took. Oh no, we
Oh
messed up.
no. Oh, all right. Well,
So
nonsense like that happens at sometimes. So I get
yeah,
it.
massive apologies to Drew. I did make him play Penitent Host on layout 5,
Oh
which does
no.
not work at all.
You know,
So he managed to pull a point out of that game though.
let's
So massive props
go.
to him.
Yeah, let's go. All right. Now, one of the fun things I've been talking about, because looking at your list, there's not
Mhm,
really anything kind of interesting. There's not anything like kind of wacky, right? Because like I
right.
know when I was talking to Matt Wright, he brought a Storm Sword and a Trojan support
Mhm,
vehicle, and then most recently Scott Cairns brought a unit of 3 Armored Sentinels. I tried them twice. I'm still not convinced, but I
same.
they're interesting. They're still interesting. But I'm kind of curious. What's the most surprising thing, or like what cute tactical things are you finding with this relatively standard list that have really brought you some success?
Um, And the aggression is the biggest one, and just the willingness to push into people is one. And then the amount of rerolls I get on objectives has really surprised people. There's 5 different units that reroll all hits if the target's on an objective between the 2 large Scion bricks and the 3 battle tanks.
Yeah.
So just the sheer primary denial ability really, really catches people when they think like, oh, I'll just, tow my armiger onto this objective marker.
You're like,
You
nope.
can pretty consistently just overwatch them off the objective marker.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Um, Other really fun ones, I don't know if you've seen the Rapid Ingress Scion Overwatch
Yep. We
plays that you
we
can
definitely
pull
talked
off.
about this. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's a solid one. You can do something kind of
Yeah.
similar
So
with
real
the Leman
quick,
Russ
so
Battle Tank.
I know what you're
Okay,
talking about, but for anybody who's watching that doesn't, could you explain it real quick?
sure. So
Yeah.
you basically look for a charge your opponent has set up, ideally one that starts on an objective marker. And you, at the end of their movement, rapid ingress your 15 Scions where they can see the unit that wants to make the charge. And then in your opponent's charge phase, you now have 15 Scions that are rerolling all hits, maybe with lethal, definitely with sustain, ready to overwatch. And the math works out to sustain and full rerolls is about the equivalent of hitting on threes, with 11 plasma, 3 melta, and more hotshot volley shots than you want to count. So you just kind of look at your opponents like their Drazar or their Armiger and say like, do you still want to make this charge? I bet you don't. And 2CP is a little expensive, but our CP economy's gone way down with the reinforcements changes. So very frequently you can do that or just threaten to do that, and they have to plan their charge phase entirely differently from what they initially thought.
Yeah. I've definitely noticed because I've still been playing. I've only played like 3 games of Pride
Mhm.
Nexus so far, but every single game I'm like, wait, I can just stratagem almost every phase. It feels like it's kind of nuts.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a really good tactic that I've seen. One of the fun things that I've asked a couple other people is
Hmm.
the first one: what guard units do you find, or what's the most overrated unit in the guard index?
I'm gonna get so much flack when I say Bulgrin.
Really? Okay. There's a lot of Bulgarian apologists in the Discord that we're in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, right now, it's probably just Bulgrin. They're neat for blunting charges, and I get it on certain terrain layouts, like some of the UKTC stuff I've seen where there's like no sight lines. Um, I'll just go full spicy. I think Bulgrin are a crutch for bad players who can't
Ooh,
just
okay.
handle movement or blunt charges with other units.
Yeah, looking at you, Clifton. Fair. All right. So that one, a little bit overrated, and you can just do the same thing with Leman Russes, right? But
Yeah, exactly.
the
Why would I blunt a charge with a unit of Bulgrin when I could just use a Vanquisher?
fair. It is cheaper. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
But then the other one, could you give me 2 units that you think are really underrated and people need to be looking at more?
Underrated, looked at more. Um, Making a Scion brick your warlord specifically. That'll count that as maybe half of one.
Sure. Yeah.
Um,
And why is the warlord part of it so valuable to you?
because it makes your Scion's battle line, and that then lets you raise banners. It lets you do the secret mission or deny the secret mission that cares about battle line. A lot of the rules make battle line matter in some way. So raise banners, obviously. I think it's called swift action that lets you advance or fall back and do actions. And the funniest one is the one that says you can bring in a battle line unit from reserves on turn one. And the first time you do that to an opponent with the 15 Scion brick will just completely break their mind.
Yeah, that
Um,
makes sense.
so that's one. I think the 20 Krieg, it's really grown on me. Just any 20-man unit. Um, I've been very against the 20-man Kriegs with the Marshal, so I think that's just too many points for not enough durability. But just 20 of any guardsmen, Catachans, infantry squad, doesn't really matter. Just sitting somewhere kind of safe is so many points denied over the course of the game. As they deny Call the Horde when your opponent draws it, and that unit alone, if you position it right, can deny 3 of the 4 secret missions. So if they're outside your deployment zone, they deny the battle line one. If you just sit them on an objective marker, they have 40 OC, so they will almost definitely deny the hold all 3 objectives in the middle one. And if you think your opponent is going to take the kill units down to like half strength, You can just rush these guys forward really early, get them killed, reinforcement them, and hold them until the end of the game. Drop them in the safest spot you can, and there's very low odds that they're going to get killed down to 9 guys remaining. So if that counts as my second, then those are
Yeah,
my
I
two.
mean,
If I need to pick a third after the Warlord, let me know.
that sounds good. Okay. I told you earlier on I didn't get like a really nice one, but I do have a tier list. I don't know if I can share this with you, but I'm gonna put it up on the screen so at least the audience can
Mhm.
see it. Now,
Sure.
uh, let me see if I can. This one. I'm going to change this. Okay. So at least you can see it now. You can't see me
Yep.
anymore. But actually, I think this changed everyone. I'll figure it out in post. All
Sure.
right, so this one doesn't have the tank commander on it because this looks like this was built, yeah, last edition. But I'm
Okay.
curious, first off, I don't think that these kind of tiers are particularly useful when thinking about 40K.
Yeah. The different tanks have such different roles that,
Yeah.
like, depending on the board I'm on, I will have massively different opinions on, for example, Vanquisher versus Eradicator.
Yeah.
So if I've got open lanes, Vanquishers all day. If I don't, Eradicators are way better.
Yeah. So I'm gonna propose something a little bit different here instead of
Sure.
just like S through D. I really like build around as the top
Okay.
tier, right? Like this is the kind of things like you put it in your list and you like it dictates what other choices you're gonna make. Okay.
Makes sense.
Beyond that, I really like having generally strong. Like you can kind of slot
Hmm.
this into any list and it's going to be pretty good. And then the last one that I think is really useful is nice to have. Like if you have extra points in your list, you're generally going to like this. And
Makes
then
sense.
the last one, or there's one, fine, but why? Right? Like this is the kind of things where it's like, there's oftentimes things where there are other units that do the same job but better. Right? So it's like,
Hmm.
I think for us, it kind of like the armored sentinels oftentimes fall into this. Like it's fine, but there's probably something better.
For sure.
And then we have don't.
Makes sense.
Yeah, so let's go
Um,
ahead and go through them. We'll go ahead and go left to right down here. So let's start with the
sure.
Vanquisher. Where would you put the Vanquisher and why?
Okay, so is a Vanquisher nice to have? So it's definitely nice to have or generally strong.
Okay, we'll go ahead and put
And
it
it's
here because it's more
most
clickbaity.
and most of the value of Vanquisher comes from the fact that it costs 145 points for Leman Russ Hull. Its main gun is funny and it will scare people and it will occasionally blow up a Chimera,
Yep,
but if it did not have the main gun, I would still pay 140 of the 145 points for it,
fair.
and maybe even still full points for it. So I
Wow.
think
Okay.
that's what takes it down to nice to have,
Okay.
is just the fact that the main gun is no, because it has the main gun, it's generally strong. Final
Okay.
answer. It's
All right.
generally
Final
strong
answer.
because in addition to being the cheapest hull, it also just can control space in really funny ways with the giant
Yeah.
cannon.
I've always said that as a guard player, not always, one of the things I've
Mhm.
recently come to is the Vanquisher, as the guard player, you should assume that it's always going to miss. But your
Oh
opponent
yeah,
needs to assume that it's
absolutely.
always going to hit.
The only caveat to that is when you bring 3 Vanquishers, then you get to start assuming
Yeah.
this will work.
Fair. It's got like a 55% like forcing wounds against like most
Yeah.
vehicles. So like, when you have 3 of them that's 165%, right? Like that's just how math works.
And if you have 3 of them, you could just think of it as like, what if I had a Baneblade, but I could split it up into 3 different units if I really need to?
Ooh. Yeah, that's exciting. All right, so I generally agree. Like, especially you've generally convinced me that the Vanquisher is probably in like one of those two tiers. I don't really have anything to add there, so let's go ahead and talk about the Eradicator. Where does this one go?
Um, all right, so Eradicator, Exterminator, Executioner always confuses me, so
Yeah,
I'm just going
Eradicator
to
is the
make
one
sure.
that can shoot into its own combat with the like
Okay.
anti-marine gun.
That one definitely feels in the nice to have category.
Interesting. That's higher than
It's
I would have put it.
it's been useful in some metas. Like when Green Tide was a menace, it was pretty solid into Green Tide. If you're really worried about Blood Angels, I think it is one of the better Blood Angel counter russes. Um, honestly, I don't think any Russ is below nice to have, except for the, well, I won't spoil which one, but I think
We'll
there's
get
only
there.
one that's fine but why, and everything else is nice
All
to have or
right.
better.
Sure. Yeah. I definitely was thinking about the Eradicator. I think when you're looking at the 40, I was about to say League of Legends because that's just where I'm at. I was definitely looking at the Eradicator as kind of fine, but why? But
Hmm.
that's mostly right now, right?
That's fair.
Because I think, like you said, like in Green Tide, the Eradicator definitely is a nice to have, and I think it can even compete with the Vanquisher depending on what meta
Hmm.
you're playing. However, I generally look at the Eradicator and be like, ah, but this could have been an Exterminator or a Battle Tank, right? Like you can find a couple of extra points. If you can't find 20 points, then you can put in an Eradicator, but otherwise, like Exterminators, Executioners, and Battle Tanks just like do the same job but better a lot of the time. But anyway,
So let me try and sell you on it a little bit. It
okay,
can shoot into or out of combat, not with
yeah,
its main gun, don't care at all, but its multi-meltas still hit on threes if you need them to in combat or
okay,
if it's shooting out of its own combat.
yeah. That part's definitely nice to have. Yeah, I definitely think it's a solid it's a solid tank, like I
Hmm.
said, but no, I definitely think there's a lot of things that can do the same thing better. But will
That's fair.
ultimately, I think if I could put it like here, I probably would.
Yeah,
Yeah,
halfway between is pretty solid.
yeah. All right, let's talk about the Exterminator, the one that shreds armor.
Okay. Up until recently, I've had very negative opinions on the Exterminator,
Hmm.
but Pariah Nexus caused me to have a massive shift in mindset.
Okay,
So I think it is in the nice to have category now,
okay,
where it is supporting a very specific problem that you have, which is AP 1 and 2 guns that you need to punch up.
yeah, yeah. I mean that makes sense to me. I'm probably like similar to the Eradicator, like probably like
Mm,
right here with the Exterminator, just because I think we have a lot of AP 1 and 2 guns that are
right.
good except for that, which is why it becomes like I'm very much like the Rogel Dorn is in my build around category. And if the Rogel
Oh,
Dorn is built around, the Exterminator is like, well, yeah, let's bring it in there just to make the Dorn even better. But
also, here's where I add the real spice to call out
yeah,
specifically Chris Daly. The Dorn is in the don't category for me.
really, wow. Well, we can
It's
see a
kind of
lot
just
of
become a
players do
meme.
very well with it.
Oh yeah, I think it is a reasonable tank that draws you to playing wrong,
Okay.
because it just has so many different guns that do so many different things that don't line up together. And I'd much rather have two tanks that do their one thing better. The
Okay.
Dorn is specifically a meme in my local community though, because one of the few matches I've lost recently, I borrowed two Rogaldorns. They underperformed massively, and I've sworn them off forever.
That's interesting. I feel like so I've always said this, but I feel like tier lists tell us more about the people making the tier list than anything on the tier list. And
That's fair.
I think that might be the greatest example of that, right? It's like, I'm like build around and you're like don't, but I think it is very much just because it sounds like we don't play 40K particularly similarly despite playing the same army. That's one thing
Yeah,
I love
for
about the
sure.
guard as well, right? Like, we talked to Clifton, who plays a
Mhm.
ton. Paul Clifton from China plays a ton of melee, like almost as much melee as you can. And
Yeah.
then Nick Jagello, who we also talk to fairly often, is just like, I just want to put dudes in chimeras, and it's like, yeah, okay, that's cool. And then every single, I feel like I'm somewhere in between the three of you, right? Like, I feel like I'm a bad version of Bruce Lee. I take the good things from all the martial arts and I make them slightly worse, you know?
Yeah, you're the only normal one of all of
I'm the only
us.
normal one for sure. Anyway,
So can I special request that we rename the don't column to Dornt?
Dornt. All right, I'll accept it. Dornt. All right. For
Perfect.
everybody else, this is one is a David special, but all right, let's go to the next one. We got the Executioner, officially and objectively the coolest tank in the guard with the
Yeah,
giant
for
plasma
sure.
cannon on top.
Yeah, so this one is kind of in the same category as the Eradicator of it is a meta call, Leman Russ,
Hmm.
where you're seeing a lot of like aggressors or terminators or chosen. So if you think back to the meta like November, October, there were two of these in my Warzone list because there were just a ton of three wound marine bodies running around,
Yeah.
and I just wanted a tank that could make them stop doing things to me. But right now, I don't think they're very good because it's more either 2 wound Marines or larger things running around, so it kind of doesn't hit that.
Yeah.
But when you have the right opponent, the Executioner will be the most valuable Russ in your list.
Yeah. I'm actually really curious then. So is this a nice to have or a fine but why for you?
I think it's on the same borderline as the Eradicator, where depending on the meta we're in, if this is a
Fair.
current meta list, then I think both of those drop down. If it's a more general, like timeless 10th edition, I think both are fine, but why?
All right, I like fine but why. I think it's a good tier to have. I
Sounds good.
definitely because I recently made the video about Leman Russ's as well, and
Hmm.
I put Executioner in like a this is fine, but
Hmm.
my argument was that the battle tank kills most of the same targets almost as well and
Right.
is way better into a wider variety of targets.
Makes
However,
sense.
I am kind of curious, especially now that we're seeing a lot more like Inner Circle Dark Angels being played, if the Executioner might rise up again.
Yeah.
Although it is
I could
damage
definitely see that, yeah.
3, damage 3 into 4 wound models is not bad, especially because they're damage -1. I don't know. I have to
Yeah.
do some noodling on it.
You also always have the problem though of like if we need 3 damage, we just have Meltaguns that you drive close with. So
Yeah, yeah,
it's
yeah,
more
yeah.
when you need 3 damage that is dealt across the board rather than 3 damage dealt relatively close to yourself.
True. Yeah. All right. Then we got the Punisher, the Gatling tank. This one also looks really cool, but I think it hasn't been that great since we lost Pask.
Yeah, I just don't think there's reason to play this ever.
Yeah.
So it was going to be fine, but why? But since we kind of dropped the other two down, it's in the same category as Rogaldorn's. Bad tank, don't play it.
Yeah. Is there anything redeeming about the Punisher in your eyes?
You get to roll a lot of dice. That's kind of fun.
Fair. Yeah. I I think I'm a little bit nicer to the Punisher, but it's only better into infantry. And we are just
Yeah,
so much better at or we're not like better. We're just so good at killing infantry because like you said, every single one of these tanks just has a heavy stubber just stapled on for some reason.
yeah.
And
I think it also
yeah,
benefited the least from the new army change because it is getting lethals against the thing you don't want to shoot it at,
yeah.
and it's getting no bonus against the thing you do want to shoot it at.
Well, it gets dev
So,
wounds still.
yeah, but
Cool. Yeah, they don't really have like good saves anyway in general. So,
yeah.
oh, interestingly, I think Jester in his spreadsheet has like Punishers are actually one of the best tanks at shooting Custodes models, if I remember correctly.
Huh,
Just because
that's
like
interesting.
the dev wounds end up coming in, but I don't know if this is before or after like the mortal wound or like film of pain has been added back in. I would have to ask him, but they're surprisingly good against Terminator models. Is kind of what I'm saying. Not better than other
I
things, but
believe that.
surprisingly good. All
Yeah,
right,
for sure.
the Demolisher,
Straight to build around here.
straight to build around. All right, I
Strength
mean let's
14
hear
is
about it.
amazing. Shooting combat is amazing. Uh, 24-inch range generally doesn't matter. It mattered for the teams list I was playing, so I was planning on being on horribly open boards. But if you're playing anything resembling correct terrain, the Demolisher should basically always be in range of anything you ever want to shoot. Um, I'm just going to tack Tank Commander onto this one
hmm
because if you're taking a Tank Commander, it should be a Demolisher Tank Commander, and it also goes in this tier.
Interesting. So one of the things that I've been talking about, and both Matt Wright and Scott Cairns, who did these
Mhm.
videos as well, have both been saying that the tank commander they think is overrated. Now, first off, I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
Um, haven't gotten enough time with the new lethals rule to have a solid opinion on the changes to it. But before the lethals change, I don't think I built a single list that had fewer than two, and most lists started with 3 tank commanders.
Yeah,
The shoot on death is just so valuable for any sort of gun mirror. Like those 3 tanks on their own will beat entire categories of army for you. And
yeah,
something that does that is just so hard not to bring.
yeah. I I generally agree. I don't have a square for it, but I would probably put tank commanders in generally strong for me,
Hmm.
just because having played a couple of games of Pride Nexus without tank commanders, I miss them a little bit.
Yeah.
But this is probably like kind of like I was talking about before. This is probably the place where instead of the armored sentinels is where I would
Mhm.
look to slot in a tank commander again, just because it's a lot of damage that the sentinels just aren't bringing. Anyway,
Yeah.
our last one, El Clasico, the battle tank.
With the new lethals change, it goes from a nice to have to a build around.
All right. Okay. Tell me about
Uh,
it.
Rerolls and lethals go great together. Its only big downside is the AP -1 on the main gun, but its big secret is its main gun is 4 multi-meltas with lethal and rerolls, and the main gun is just kind of also there.
Fair. Yeah.
But if you have Exterminators, if you have Fields of Fire, if you have Hellhounds, you can get that main gun up to an effective AP3, which is enough to still hurt most targets. So, kind of got two modes. It's got the mode of like standalone fire rerolling multi-meltas, and the main gun doesn't matter. And then it's got the second mode of fully build your list around it, add Exterminators, add Hellhounds,
Mm,
basically play the list that I was playing in this team's event, and then kill things from 48 inches away with
gotcha.
AP3, Strength 10, Damage 3 guns.
All right, David, can I make a request about this tier list that's very silly?
Of course.
Okay, so we are very close to having this look like an F. Okay, so which one of these two are we moving up?
um, Executioner or Eradicator? I've played Executioners in a list that has won. I've not played Well, no, I have played an Eradicator.
You did. You went 4-1
Uh,
with one of them.
yeah, one of
Yeah.
them was a 4-1 GT that was the day after the points drop, so I built it in 24 hours. The other was a list I refined for months.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the Executioner gets the nice to have.
All right, there we go. And now we got our perfect F. The worst tier list we've ever seen.
If we
Uh,
put a Dorn in Dornt, then we'll have a nice E. Maybe that's
ooh,
the better way to
true.
do it.
I don't want to spend the time figuring out how to do this. I don't use this website basically at all. Anyway, let me go ahead. I think this is it. All right, now you can see me again. Close that out. All right, now everybody can see all of us again. We'll figure out what I actually do in the editing and post. But anyway, we spent about an hour here. Is there anything else you want to talk about before I let you go?
Um, Biggest thing is just shout out to everyone who was on my team 4++. The core members Morgan, Jonathan, Drew, and John have been my teammates for over a year now. Uh, Drew and John since I was playing Magic like years and years ago, and then also George, Colin, Walter who joined us just to bump us from fives to eights. Huge shout out to all of them. It was a trophy that's in my house, but it was really a team trophy. They just only gave us one, so they all deserve equal credit. And then biggest shout out to my wife, who, while 20 weeks pregnant, still showed up to a random tournament in Chattanooga and did math for me all weekend. Um, if I hadn't already married her, I'd marry her again just for doing that. So massive shout out there.
Awesome. Well, shout out to all of your teammates and your wife. Sounds like a great time overall. We're gonna go ahead and close it out, everyone. So hope you guys have learned a lot from this tactical debrief, and we will see you guys all next time. This is where I do the really weird bye bye.